Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Joseph Parker's handlers Duco Events, they're targeting a ring return for the New Zealander for late July or potentially August, and they hope to have a tall and ranked opponent secured within the next couple of weeks. So 26-year-old Joseph Parker, as we know, he recently lost to unified champion Anthony Joshua. He's since, though, been confirmed in the rankings for 3 of the 4 sanctioning bodies. More on that later. So what I want to do, though, is first work through the statements from Parker's promoter, David Higgins, and then take a closer look at who the opponent could realistically be that Joseph Parker will fight. Because given the loose criteria that's been thrown out there, tall and ranked, there's actually not that many guys it could actually be. Okay, to Radio New Zealand's coverage, it says that Parker, he's back from holidaying in Samoa, he's running every day in Auckland, and in terms of his next fight, Higgins says it's a 50-50 prospect whether it's held in New Zealand or the UK. So Higgins says, the absence of a good opportunity in the UK would necessitate looking at New Zealand and whether we can mount a credible promotion here with a big name opponent. Higgins says they're talking seriously to 1 or 2 opponents and would ideally have their next move confirmed within 2 weeks and had a clear idea what they wanted. Joseph's next opponent is someone that's big and tall, because a lot of the top guys are big and tall, and he can learn from his mistakes. It's ideally someone in the top 15 or top 10 of the sanctioning bodies and someone with a name that's promotable. And not wanting to weaken the negotiation position, the story goes on to say the potential opponents that Duco are talking to, that Higgins didn't want to reveal exactly who was in the mix to face Parker next. And the story also says the likes of Alexander Povetkin, probably not realistic, and that the winner of Tony Bellew versus David Haye was also unlikely. And Parker, he's expected to remain in Auckland until his next fight is announced, when he will head back to his Las Vegas training base and begin preparations with Kevin Barry, his trainer. Okay, so a bit to unpack there, but I'll start by saying it's very good to hear that Parker is staying active and running every day. And given he dropped over 30 pounds to get into the high 230s for his last fight against Joshua, he's going to have his work cut out to stay at the weight and avoid blowing up between fights, because we've seen a little bit of that creeping in recently with Joseph Parker. In the Joshua fight, that was the case in point. He started camp at 266 pounds, so had to lose 30 pounds over the course of his camp. Second, okay, a choice of opponents being big and tall. It's not exactly surprising when you consider that the 2 current champions are big guys. Joshua at 6'6", Wilder at 6'7". And then also you've got former unified champion Tyson Fury. He's returning. He's on the periphery at the moment, but he could be in the mix at some point. He's a big guy, 6'9". So a tall guy that's inside the top 15 or possibly even top 10 of one of the sanctioning bodies, and with a name that's promotable, as Higgins put it. And that criteria, it actually narrows things down more than you actually might think. I mean, in saying that, though, Duco did try to sell to the public that Alexander Dimitrenko was a better opponent than Carlos Takam. Even Colonel Bob Sheridan, he should have known better. He was saying in the broadcast for the fight that Dimitrenko was better than Takam and that he hit harder. So their version of promotable could be very different to yours and mine. Could vary quite a bit, actually. But right now, though, so Joseph Parker, he's been placed in the WBO, WBC, and IBF rankings at 5th, 5th, and 7th, respectively. He has not been installed into the WBA rankings to date, which were last updated just over a week ago on 30 April. So I'll start with the WBO, though. So Povetkin, Brazil, White, Miller, all on screen here. They occupy the top slots. All unlikely, I believe, as they're either waiting for title shots they've just fought, or in White's case, he's about to be in an eliminator, either in the WBC or IBF. If we look at number 6, so an interesting option, Tom Schwarz. So big German, 6'5", he's unbeaten at the moment. But in saying all this, he's got a very low profile outside of Germany and in general within heavyweight fight fans. Not a lot of people have seen him fight live. Not a lot of people have seen a lot of Tom Schwarz. And will Schwarz and his team be willing to sort of veer from their relatively safe path? They've been building him up. will they be willing to guide him into the face of a dangerous opponent in Joseph Parker? It's debatable. Zhilei Zhang. So I believe this is actually one of the most viable targets out of everyone that's going to be mentioned in this video. So David Higgins, he's mentioned the Chinese Olympic medalist before in the same breath as Joseph Parker. He was one of the targets they were lining up pre the Joshua negotiations starting. So it wouldn't surprise me in the least if he was one of their top targets. And especially, you look at his record, he's an unbeaten fighter, 18-0. He's got that Olympic silver medal in his pocket, and actually selling that fight to the potentially lucrative Chinese market, it could probably generate some of the dollars that Duco would be after. So apart from Ajit Kabial, who's next at 8, I don't really see anyone else in this top 15 who either meets the criteria of being tall enough or being sellable enough for what would be a pay-per-view event if it was held in New Zealand. But in terms of Kabial, his career path right now, I actually think they'll be steering the German in a different direction, a more safer direction. And just on sort of the Kabial factor here, we have to consider guys like him and a few others that are going to be mentioned. They've just broken into the contender ranks quite recently, and they're looking for their first title shots. They're not necessarily going to be willingly, open to fighting someone like Parker. They're likely to take a safer route to a title. And that's why I think guys like Schwarz and Kabial are unlikely. But there is the exception to the rule, and someone like Zhilei Zhang, he could be quite a goer because he's a bit older, he doesn't appear to be in reach of a title anytime soon, and he might be convinced to take a Parker fight if the money is right. And the money is a big thing in getting someone to come to New Zealand if the fight is staged in New Zealand. They'll need to overpay to get someone they'd like to take Parker on in his home country. Someone that's marketable, someone that they can sell to the New Zealand public and further afield, like in Australia. And obviously, they'll be looking to build on some of Parker's recent popularity and try get his stock up in other places, especially the UK, where they do want Parker to be fighting. So it could be someone like a Zhilei Zhang, who on the surface looks pretty good in terms of the record and potential marketability, but it could also be a well-seasoned contender that's got a few losses on the record, but a decent ranking right now. And there's a few of those guys that are coming up. If we move on to the IBF, so we've got Parker at 7th spot in the rankings. And those above Parker, they're unlikely available because they're either preparing to fight, just fought, they're waiting on a title shot, or in Carlos Takam's case, he's not tall enough. And actually, Parker, Takam, a rematch, I'm not sure either is probably looking in that direction right now. But if you apply the measures to the remainder of the 15, exclude the guys already mentioned in the WBO, we're left with 3 potential names in my view. Alexander Dmytrenko, Charles Martin, and Otto Wallin. A Dmytrenko rematch, not likely. The public's probably just not going to be willing to pay to watch him lie down again, because that's what happened first time around. Charles Martin at 9. Now, this is a very interesting potential matchup, and potentially it could have some legs. And for all his faults, Martin does have some good skills, even if he's got very little heart. But he's a decent southpaw. There's not many of those floating around in the division at the moment. And he's got height. He's 6'5". I mean, you could question how much he would be willing to get into the ring with a guy that survived 12 rounds with Anthony Joshua, especially when he was dispatched within a couple. But Martin, I wouldn't rule it out entirely, but yeah, in the same breath, how likely is it? I think Martin, after his big payday against Anthony Joshua, he's probably going to be looking for softer fights in the United States. Parker, Martin, it may not be the will to get that made from the Martin side, but I mean, we'll have to see. Otto Wallin, meanwhile, here's a guy, he's just coming off a career performance against Adrian Granat, and he's looking to make a move in the rankings. There's been a lot of talk about him wanting to make a push to a world title. So, taking on a Joseph Parker, beating him, it would certainly get him much closer to a title shot. And Parker reasonably ranked in 3 different sanctioning bodies. Wallin could benefit from taking on a Parker. Although in saying that, he probably actually would benefit from 1 or 2 more fights at least, before taking on someone of the caliber of Joseph Parker. If we move to the WBC, And if we exclude those who've already been previously mentioned, those tied up with upcoming fights, waiting for fights, potential title shots, those who've just fought, and then throw in the height criteria, there's actually not a name that I can identify as being a potential target. But having said that, we do know that Luis Ortiz, who's one slot above Parker, and the same height as Parker, he's been ordered to face Dillian Whyte in a final eliminator. And if Whyte opts to go down the IBF route, which he might, the eliminator opportunity, it could fall to Parker. And that would be a very big fight and a very good fight. And Duco, it would have a decent chance of winning the purse bid. It's a very marketable fight because Ortiz, he's just come off a good fight with Deontay Wilder. It was a loss, but he did prove his chops. Okay, so while Parker, he's not ranked in the WBA, it doesn't necessarily mean that he won't target someone within the top 15. And if we exclude the various factors already mentioned, we've got two outside possibilities, I believe. So ranked number 5 in the WBA, we've got unbeaten American Trevor Bryan. He's 19-0. He's the same height as Parker, 6'4". And if we look further down the list, we've got at number 12, there's also unbeaten 6'5" Romanian Bogdan Dinu. So Bryan, out of the two though, he's probably the more likely option, and if you cut him a decent enough check, you might be able to get him to New Zealand. But if you look at the record, it's a little bit thin, but, you know, unbeaten American, you would be able to sell that. But I would say, based on the loose criteria that David Higgins has thrown out, if it does end up being someone not already mentioned in this video, I'll be very interested to hear how they try to sort of spin it and sell it to us. Because like me, I'm sure there's a number of fans who'll be very disappointed if Duco match Parker with an out-and-out journeyman, but then try to sell it as a pay-per-view event. We've had that before. I'm not really looking forward to the prospect of more like that. I want him to be facing someone who's at least a ranked fighter. You know, it doesn't have to be the hardest fight in the world, but at least a ranked fighter, you can make a case for that and sell that to the public on that basis. So, you know, the top contenders at the moment in my mind, I think the guy that stands out, as I already mentioned, is China's Zhilei Zhang. That's a decent name if they're able to get that fight. But at the moment, you know, it's a little bit opaque on what's going to happen next. We have to see. I mean, the criteria, it may go out the window if they can't overpay someone to get here. But if I was to pick on, you know, just the names and the loose criteria given, I mean, Zhilei Zhang does seem to be a top target. But we'll just have to see. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.